The holding room smelled like recycled air and metal. No window. One light strip on the ceiling. A flat bench bolted to the wall. Darren Cole sat on it with his back straight and his hands resting on his knees. He had been sitting like that for 3 hours. The Union officers who placed him there had not locked the door. They had simply closed it and walked away. That told Darren a great deal about how they saw him. Not a threat. Not a prisoner, really. More like a stray animal brought in from the cold. Something to be processed and then released once the paperwork was done. He did not mind. Let them think that. 2 hours earlier, a team of Union security personnel had taken everything off his body and placed it into a clear storage container. His field armor, stripped plate by plate. His sidearm. His blade. His survival kit with the fire cord and the water filter and the small folded map of the frontier moon where his squad had been hit. His communication device. Even the worn cloth band he kept around his left wrist, the one his mother had tied there the day he shipped out the first time. The officer doing the logging had been polite about it. He had spoken through a translator unit clipped to his collar, his four-fingered hand moving carefully over each item before placing it in the container. Standard decontamination and safety protocol, he had said. You will receive everything back when the situation has been assessed. Darren had nodded and said nothing. The situation, as the Union described it, was simple. His squad had been on a routine patrol of a frontier moon when they were ambushed by a faction called the Dusk Hand. 7 soldiers went in. 1 came out. Darren had been found 3 kilometers from the ambush site, alone, moving east on foot. The other 6 were listed as missing. Voss was one of the 6. Darren had known Voss for 11 years. They had trained together, served together, pulled each other out of bad places more times than either of them could count. Voss was loud and funny and made terrible decisions about card games, and he was still alive somewhere. Darren was certain of this the way he was certain of very few things. The door opened. A small alien stepped inside. Young by the look of him. His skin was a pale gray blue, his eyes large and amber-colored. He wore a white medical coat with a Union symbol on the breast. He was carrying a tray with a food container and a cup of something warm. I am Grell, he said through his translator. I am the station medic assigned to your care. I brought you something to eat. Thank you, Darren said. Grell set the tray down on the bench beside him and then stood there for a moment, watching him the way a person watches something they cannot quite figure out. You have been sitting in the same position for 3 hours, Grell said. Are you in pain? No. Most beings in your situation will be showing signs of distress. Elevated pulse, irregular breathing, pacing. I know, Darren said. He picked up the food container and looked at the contents. Some kind of grain block and a pale broth. He ate without complaint. Grell pulled a small device from his pocket and began taking readings. Can I ask you something? He said. Go ahead. You lost your entire squad. Your equipment has been removed. You are on a station you have never been to, surrounded by species you have never met. And you are calm. He tilted his head. Ow! Darren looked at him. Being upset won't bring my squad back or get my gear returned. Grell made a small note on his device. Unusual, he said quietly, more to himself than to Darren. Very unusual emotional suppression. A few minutes later, Admiral Soverell came in. He was tall for his species, the Vreth, with a flat, broad face and silver rank markings along his jaw. He stood near the door and spoke with the tone of someone who had better things to do. Soldier Cole, your people's frontier outpost has been informed of your status. A full inquiry has been submitted to the Dusk Hand regarding the 6 missing members of your unit. He paused. These things take time. The Union will handle the matter. You are to remain on Orith 9 until further notice. How long? Darren asked. Soverell blinked slowly. The inquiry process is typically 4 to 6 weeks. The number sat in the air between them. 6 weeks. Voss was out there somewhere, probably cold, probably hurt, probably counting on the fact that someone was coming. 6 weeks was not a plan. 6 weeks was an obituary written in advance. Darren said nothing. He nodded once. The Admiral left. Grell lingered a moment longer. He was still watching Darren with that careful, curious look. Is there anything else you need? He asked. No, Darren said. Then after a pause, actually yes. What are the meal times here? And is there a route for physical exercise? Humans need to move regularly. Biological requirement. Grell nodded and told him. Meals at 3 intervals during the light cycle. Walking permitted in the main corridor between the second and third meal. Monitored but unrestricted. Thank you, Darren said. Grell left. The door clicked shut behind him. Darren sat still for another moment. Then he looked slowly around the room. The light strip, the bench, the tray, the cup, the edges of the door frame. The faint vibration in the floor that told him the station's engine core was somewhere below and to the left. He was not calm because he had accepted the situation. He was calm because he had already started working. The second meal of the day was grain broth again, this time with something that resembled a flatbread. Grell brought it himself. He seemed to enjoy the visits more than his duties required. He sat across from Darren on a small folding stool he had brought from somewhere and watched the human eat with the focused interest of someone studying a creature they had only read about in reports. You were a soldier for how long? Grell asked. 17 years, Darren said. And before that? Famaresson, North Country, cold winters. Grell made a note. Is it true that your planet has organisms that can end a Vreth soldier in under 4 minutes through direct contact? Depends on the region, Darren said. Where I grew up, it was mostly wolves and frostbite. Grell tilted his head. You say that as though it is ordinary. It was ordinary. Darren tore a piece of the flatbread. Every place on Earth wants to kill you in some way. You learn to read it. You learn to move with it. Grell was quiet for a moment, writing quickly. Then he looked up. Do you miss your equipment? Your weapons and armor? Darren looked at him. There was no sharpness in it, just a long and level look. I still have everything I need, he said. Grell stared at him. You have a food tray and a change of clothes. Yes, Darren said. Grell wrote something down. Darren suspected it said something like subject appears delusional. After the meal, Darren walked the corridor. It was long and curved slightly with the shape of the station ring. Gray walls, light strips along the floor, a few union workers moving between sections. He walked slowly, like a man with nowhere to be. He counted steps between doorways. He noted which doors required a key panel and which ones were on automatic sensors. He looked at the maintenance hatches set low in the walls, the kind used for running cable and pipe through the station body. He looked at the worker uniforms. Pale gray, one size standard, loose fitting. At the far end of the corridor, there was a bay where supply crates sat stacked behind a low barrier. Beyond them, through a wide-pressure door, was a docking arm. Darren could see the tail end of a shuttle from where he stood. A small cargo vessel, the kind used for routine supply runs. It had a Union freight tag on the side and a departure board above the door that cycled silently through numbers. He stood there for just a moment, reading the board. Then he turned and walked back. In his room, he sat on the bench and took stock. The food tray was pressed alloy, thin but stiff. The edge could be shaped with enough pressure against a hard surface. The cup was the same material. The medical wrap Grell had placed on a small bruise above his ribs during the first examination used an elastic band to hold itself in place. Grell had replaced it that morning and left the old wrap on the small shelf by the door without thinking. The data pad provided for recreation had a basic screen and a simple operating system. It also had a map function that he had unlocked by asking Grell which sections of the station were safe to walk in. He had been given a general overview to put his mind at ease, Grell had said. 3 views of the station layout. Darren had studied each one for 4 minutes and then closed the screen. He did not need to look at them again. He knew where the engine section sat. He knew where the maintenance bay was located 2 levels below the corridor. He knew the docking arm schedule based on the board he had read. Supply shuttle, 3rd slot, departure at the end of the night cycle. Flight path registered to a Union logistics outpost called Wren Station, which sat in a system 3 hours out from duskfall. He knew this because when Grell had mentioned offhand that resupply vessels from this station serviced the outer reaches, Darren had simply asked him to name a few of the stops. Grell had answered the way people always answer polite questions, freely without thinking. That night, when the station went to its low-power sleep cycle and the light strips along the floor dimmed to a faint blue, Darren lay flat on the bench and closed his eyes. He slept for 4 hours. His body knew how to do this on command. It was a skill built over years of short windows and hard ground, and the absolute need to be sharp when the window closed. He set the rhythm in his mind before he closed his eyes, and his body kept it. He woke in the dark without any sound. He sat up slowly. His hands found the elastic band from the old medical wrap on the shelf. His fingers found the edge of the food tray. He pressed the tray against the floor with slow, controlled pressure and felt the edge begin to curl. He was not afraid. Fear was a signal, and he had read this signal and responded to it already. What was left now was just the work. He thought about Voss out there somewhere on Duskfall, in the cold, waiting. He pressed a little harder on the tray. 4 to 6 weeks, the Admiral had said. Darren figured he needed about 2 days. Between the second and third meal of the day, there was a gap of roughly 40 minutes when the corridor staffing dropped. Darren knew this because he had walked that corridor 4 times over 2 days and counted every face he passed. The pattern was not hard to find. Shift change pulled 2 of the 3 posted workers to the east section. The third moved to the opposite end to assist with a delivery log. 40 minutes. That was the window. He moved on the second day. He left his room during the permitted walking period, which meant nothing unusual on any monitor. He walked the corridor at his usual pace. At the midpoint, where a maintenance hatch sat low in the wall between 2 overhead light strips, he stopped and crouched as though fixing the hem of his boot. The hatch was not locked. It was on a friction seal, the kind pushed open from either side. The Union did not lock maintenance hatches because the maintenance hatches were not considered a way in or out of anything important. They were for cable runs and pipe access. They were also large enough for a human to move through on hands and knees. Darren pulled the hatch, slipped inside, and pressed it shut behind him. The tunnel was dark and narrow and smelled of old heat. He moved through it by feel, counting turns from the mental map he had built over 2 days of corridor walks. 1 left, 2 straights, a drop of about a meter where the tunnel stepped down to follow a pipeline. Another straight. He came out in the maintenance bay. It was a low-ceilinged room full of tools and parts and the honest smell of machine oil. Work lights on the ceiling. No one present at this hour. He had checked the staff schedule by asking Grell what time the station maintenance crew ate their meals, framing it as a question about whether he could request repair for a loose panel in his room. Grell had told him without hesitation. He moved through the bay with purpose. He found a belt tool pouch hanging on a peg. Inside, a cutting tool, a short-handled wrench, a wire loop used for pulling cable, and a handful of seal clips. He took what he needed and buckled the pouch under his shirt. Along one wall was a rack of worker uniforms, the pale gray type, folded and stacked by size. He pulled on one over his clothes. Too wide in the shoulders, too long in the sleeve. He rolled the cuffs up twice and left the collar open. He walked out of the maintenance bay, through the main door, not the hatch. 2 Union workers passed him in the next corridor. Neither one looked at him for more than a moment. He kept his pace steady and his eyes forward. At the docking arm, he paused at the barrier. The pressure door to the supply shuttle was closed, but not sealed. The departure board above it showed the same number it had shown when he first read it. 40 minutes to the end of the night cycle. The shuttle was being loaded with cargo by a single operator using a handcart. Darren watched the operator make 3 trips, each one a 2-minute cycle from the storage stack to the shuttle hold. On the 3rd trip, when the operator disappeared inside the shuttle with the cart, Darren walked past the barrier and stepped up into the hold. He moved quickly to the back. There was a row of large cargo crates marked with agricultural freight tags. He found one that was sealed but not locked. He opened it, looked inside, packed grain blocks in seal bags. He shifted them forward, made space, and climbed in. He pulled the lid down and held it from inside. He waited. He heard the operator return and make 2 more trips. He heard the hold door close. He felt the pressure shift as the docking arm disengaged. The engines came up under him, a low and steady vibration that moved through the floor of the crate and into his spine. The shuttle left. Back on Orith 9, Grell arrived for the 3rd meal delivery and found the room empty. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, looking at the untouched bench and the small bare shelf. Then he crossed the room and looked more carefully. On the wall above the bench, scratched into the gray surface with what must have been the edge of a food tray, were 6 words. He stared at them. Read them twice. Then he went to find the Admiral. Sovarel looked at the message on his data screen. A photograph Grell had taken of the wall. The Admiral's expression moved through several things before settling on something between irritation and a feeling he could not name. The message said, "Tell the Admiral I said thank you for the 6 weeks." "He has no weapons," Sovarel said finally. "No automat. No communication device. No navigation equipment. He is on a supply shuttle going to Ren Station." "Yes," Grell said. "He is a primitive species on an unknown shuttle route." The Admiral set down the data screen. "He will be found. He will be confused and cold, and we will bring him back and explain the seriousness of this." Grell said nothing. He was looking at the photograph on the screen, at the small, precise letters scratched into the wall. The lines were very straight, very controlled, made by someone who was not confused at all. He thought about what Darren had said during the second meal, when Grell had pointed out that all he had was a food tray and a change of clothes. "I still have everything I need." Grell looked at the Admiral and chose not to say what he was thinking. 3 kilometers from the Ren Station landing pad, in the dark and the cold, Darren Cole stepped off the shuttle roof and dropped into the gray rock below. He had ridden the last hour of the flight on the outside of the vessel. It had not been comfortable, but it had been necessary. Ren Station would have cameras, staff, and the beginnings of a search notice with his description on it. The shuttle would be docked and checked. He needed to be off it before it landed, and the outer hull had handholds near the cargo bay door that were clearly designed for inspection work. He had found them in the dark by feel. The cold at altitude had been significant. He had tucked his hands inside the worker uniform and kept his face turned away from the wind. He had done worse. A winter on the northern farms when he was 15, fence posts to set in frozen ground, fingers that stopped hurting after the first hour because they went past hurting. This was manageable. He dropped to the rock, rolled once to absorb the fall, and came up moving. Ren Station was a small logistics stop, a cluster of buildings on a flat shelf of stone with one landing pad and a fuel line running out to a storage tank. It had a ground transport bay. This was what he needed. He circled the station from outside the light reach of its perimeter lamps. The transport bay had 2 vehicles, the kind used for moving supplies across rough ground. They ran on a magnetic rail system that connected Ren Station to a mining outpost further east. The rail map was posted on the wall inside the bay. He saw it through the window. He also saw that both vehicles were unlocked. 14 minutes later, he was moving east on the rail at full speed, lying flat in the cargo bed of the transport to stay below the wind. He reached the junction where the eastern line split toward the outer reach at the edge of the mapped system. From there, the route to Duskfall was not on any rail. It was 31 kilometers on foot across a rock field that no one traveled by choice. Duskfall was not a destination. It was a sentence. He walked through the night. The terrain was broken and uneven, shelves of stone tilted by ancient pressure, gaps between them wide enough to fall into if you moved without care. The air was thin enough to make the lungs work hard. The temperature was well below what a standard galactic species could survive without an environmental suit. Darren was cold. He was also walking. He moved with the careful attention of someone who had learned long ago that terrain was either a problem or a tool, and the difference was only in how you read it. He kept the wind on his left side, which meant he was moving south-southeast based on the star positions he had studied on Grell's general station map during his second day on Orith 9. He had spent 9 minutes on the astronomy overlay, which Grell had allowed because it seemed like idle curiosity. It was not idle. Dawn on Duskfall came gray and slow. The light arrived without warmth. In it, Darren saw the facility for the first time. It sat in a low valley between 2 rock ridges, a hard square structure of poured composite material with no windows and a single wide gate on the south face. Guard towers at each corner. Sensor arrays on the roof. A landing pad behind the structure with one ship parked on it. He went aground and watched for 3 hours. The guards rotated every 2 hours. There were 4 towers, 2 guards each. The gate had a 2-person post. Everyone was in full environmental suits, sealed head to toe, because without them, Duskfall's atmosphere and cold would put them down within the hour. Darren noted this carefully. The suits had 2 weaknesses. They reduced mobility, and they reduced visibility, especially in the peripheral range where the helmet seal met the shoulder plate. He moved when the rotation was midway through its cycle, when the guards were at their most settled and the next change was still an hour away. He came up from below the east tower, moving along the base of the rock ridge where the sensor sweep had a gap. He had found the gap in the second hour of watching, when he saw that the east array swept 45 degrees and then held for 6 seconds before completing the arc. 6 seconds was enough. The first guard he encountered was alone at the base of the tower, checking a panel on the exterior wall. The man in an environmental suit cannot turn his head more than 60 degrees. He also cannot hear well through the sealed helmet. Darren came up from behind and put the man down with a controlled strike to the back of a knee, followed by one hard and precise application of the wrench from his belt pouch to the helmet's junction point. Not enough to breach the suit, enough to rattle the man inside it into unconsciousness. He took the man's access card and his radio. The second guard was at the base of the south wall. Darren came around the corner fast and used the gap at the shoulder to end the encounter in 4 seconds. He used the access card at a side door marked maintenance. Inside, the air was warmer. The lights were on. Somewhere deeper in the structure, he could hear movement and voices through the walls. He found the prisoner block on the second corridor. 12 cells, 11 occupied. In the third cell, sitting on the floor with his back against the wall and his eyes closed, was Voss. Darren put his hand flat on the small window of the cell door. Voss opened his eyes. He looked at Darren for a long moment. Then he pressed his palm against the glass from the other side. "Took you long enough," Voss said through the door comm. "I had to find a ride," Darren said, and swiped the card. The alarm went off 90 seconds after Darren opened Voss's cell. He had expected it. Access cards in a facility like this were logged. Someone at a station somewhere had seen the log entry and flagged it. 90 seconds was actually longer than he had budgeted. He used the time well. He moved down the corridor, swiping each cell door in turn. The other prisoners were a mix of species he did not recognize, thin and quiet, and blinking at him with the particular look of people who had stopped believing anyone was coming. He spoke to each one as the door opened. "Darren Cole. My name is Darren Cole. I'm getting you out. Stay close. Stay quiet. Do exactly what I say." Some of them did not speak a language his ears could parse. He used hand signs. Point at himself, point at them, point down the corridor. "Come with me." It was the oldest possible language. It worked. Voss fell in at his side, moving carefully. His left leg was stiff, and he favored his right. Ribs too, from the way he held his arm. But he was upright, and his eyes were sharp. "What do we have?" Voss asked low. "One access card, one radio, a belt pouch with a wrench and a cutting tool, 2 unconscious guards outside. About 8 minutes before their rotation check fails." Voss nodded. "Good. Great. Wonderful. I also know the building layout." "Ow! I watched it for 3 hours before I came in." Voss looked at him sideways. "You watched a prison facility on a death planet for 3 hours before walking in with a wrench." "2 guards," Darren said, "and a cutting tool." They moved. The facility had one exit that made sense, the south gate, which was the widest and closest to the landing pad. Every sensible plan pointed there, which meant the security force would cover it first and heaviest. Darren had noted a secondary option during his watch, a service corridor that ran along the east wall and connected to a fuel storage annex that had its own external hatch. It was not a proper exit. It was a pipe access point built for equipment, not people. It was also not on the south gate. He led the group into the service corridor before the first boots hit the main passage behind them. He could hear the security team's voices through the radio now, clipped and controlled, calling out positions. They had the south gate sealed. They were moving to check the cells. The service corridor was low and dim. The prisoners moved through it in a line, slow because some of them were weak and one of them had to be helped by another. Darren kept his pace matched to the slowest. He counted heads at each turn. Eleven privos, 12 total. At the fuel storage annex, he used the cutting tool on the pipe couplings along the east wall. He did not cut through them fully. He cut one halfway, enough to create a slow-pressure leak in the line. Then he sealed the annex door from the inside using a seal clip wedged into the track, which would not hold long, but would hold long enough. The radio crackled. A voice asked for a position report on units covering the East Corridor. Darren clicked the radio twice. A nonverbal check-in signal. He had heard the guards do it twice during his watch from the ridge. It bought him another 2 minutes. The external hatch was at floor level, designed for moving equipment in and out. It took the wrench and 3 minutes to undo the external bolts from inside, which was not how bolts were meant to work, but was how they worked if you had enough leverage and were motivated. Cold air poured in when the hatch opened. Several of the alien prisoners made sounds of distress. Darren crouched at the opening. I know it is cold. You will be cold for 15 minutes. After 15 minutes, you will be on a ship. Move. They moved. He went last, pulling the hatch closed behind him to slow the search. Outside, the gray dusk-fall air was sharp and the rock was hard under their feet. He pushed the pace, but kept it within what the group could hold. Voss took the left flank, limping but watching. Behind them, the facility began to come alive. Lights on the roof swung outward. Voices on the radio stopped being controlled. They reached the landing pad from the south side, using the rock ridge as a screen. One ship, the same one Darren had spotted from the ridge during his watch. A mid-range transport with a dust-can faction marker on the nose. The ramp was down. The ship was on standby power. He got the prisoners up the ramp and into the hold. He told them to sit, stay flat, and stay quiet. Voss started up the ramp. Can you fly this? Darren asked. Voss looked at the ship. It is a standard faction transport. Probably, if the controls are not locked. Go check. Voss went. Darren stood at the base of the ramp with the radio in one hand and the wrench in the other. He heard boots on rock a moment before he saw the figure come around the south corner of the facility. Not a guard. The man wore a different uniform, no helmet, no environmental suit. He was tall and broad-shouldered with close-cut gray hair and a flat expression that had not changed in many years. He held a weapon at his side, not raised yet but ready. Director Haroon had come himself. Ramp up, Darren said quietly into the hold behind him. The ramp began to rise. Haroon raised the weapon, and Darren stepped down to meet him. The wind moved between them across the landing pad, carrying the smell of cold rock and the faint hiss of the fuel leak Darren had started inside the facility. It was still going. He could hear it faintly from here. That meant no one would move heavy equipment near the east wall for a while. It also meant the guards had something else to manage. Haroon had not fired. That was interesting. Darren stood 12 meters from him and did not move. He was watching the man's hands, specifically the right one, which held the weapon with the barrel angled down at a 40-degree drop, which was the angle a person held something when they wanted to look ready but had not yet decided. If Haroon had decided, the barrel would be up. He had not decided because Darren had walked toward him instead of running. Running was expected. Running confirmed that the weapon held power over the situation. Walking forward without a weapon of your own was a different kind of statement. It broke the script. It made the other person recalculate. Haroon recalculated. This is finished, Haroon said. His voice was deep and flat. His basic was fluent. You are one man with a hand tool. I have 20 security personnel in that building. 17, Darren said. 2 are outside on the east side. 1 is still down from earlier. Haroon studied him. You counted. I count things. You are unarmed. Darren said nothing to that. Haroon's eyes moved to the ship behind him. The ramp was closed. He could hear the engines beginning to cycle up, which meant Voss had found the controls and they were not locked. Good. Those prisoners are Union-listed detainees, Haroon said. You have no authority here. You have no standing. You are a soldier from a species that the galaxy does not yet recognize as relevant. Then you have nothing to worry about, Darren said. He took 3 slow steps forward. Haroon raised the weapon. Darren stopped. 17 years of watching men hold weapons had given him a very specific kind of knowledge. Not knowledge from manuals or training rooms. Knowledge from the moment before things happened, from reading the tension in a shoulder or the stillness of a jaw or the particular way breathing changed when a decision was being locked in. Haroon was afraid, not of the ship leaving, not of the prisoners. He was afraid of the man standing 12 meters away with no weapon and no armor and no expression on his face that suggested he intended to stop. That fear made the finger tight on the trigger before the decision was actually made. Darren was already moving when the shot came. He went left and low, closing the distance fast. The shot went wide. He had known it would, because a nervous shot from a man who has not yet fully decided always pulls in the direction of the dominant shoulder, and Haroon was right-handed. He closed the distance in 3 seconds. The weapon came around for a second shot, and Darren was already inside the arc of it. His right hand went to the wrist. His left went to the weapon body. It was a simple mechanical problem. The wrist joint bent in one direction and not the other, and if you applied pressure in the right direction, it bent further than the person holding the weapon wanted it to. Haroon let go of the weapon. Darren stepped back and pointed it at the ground. Haroon was breathing hard. He looked at the weapon in Darren's hand, and then at Darren's face, and then at the rock beneath his own feet. "What do you want?" he said. "I have what I want," Darren said. "Now I'm just finishing the job." He put Haroon down with one controlled strike, hard enough to remove him from the situation and careful enough not to cause permanent harm. The man crumpled and stayed down. Darren walked up the ship's ramp, which Voss had lowered just enough to let him board. They lifted off. No pursuit came. The facility's own ship was locked in the landing system and would take 20 minutes to override. He had seen the lock panel on his approach and recognized the type. They were well away before any of that mattered. Voss flew. Darren sat in the co-seat and watched the gray rock of dusk fall away below them. In the hold, the 11 prisoners sat in a row along the wall. Some were asleep already. Others stared at the ceiling. One of them, a small four-limbed being with pale eyes, looked through the door at Darren for a long moment and then pressed one open hand to its own chest. Darren returned the gesture. They docked at Orith, 6 hours later under a Union emergency signal that Voss had transmitted on approach. Admiral Sovarell was at the bay when they came off the ship. He stood with his hands at his sides and said nothing for a long time, watching the 11 freed prisoners walk past him, and then Voss, and then Darren, who was still wearing the pale gray worker uniform, slightly torn at one shoulder, the belt pouch empty of everything except the wrench. "You had no weapons," the Admiral said finally. "I had a wrench," Darren said. "You had no armor, no navigation equipment, no communication device, no support." Sovarell paused. "What should the Union know about humans?" Darren looked at him. "We come from a world that has been trying to kill us for 10,000 years, he said. "We are still here. That should tell you something." Later, in the medical bay, Grell sat with his notes open on a small device. He scrolled back to his first entry on Darren Cole. He read the line he had written during that first examination. Unusual emotional suppression. He crossed it out. He thought for a moment. Then he wrote, "Controlled. Purposeful. Extremely dangerous." He looked at what he had written. Then he added one more line below it, slowly, as though making sure he got the words right. "Do not take their gear as a comfort to yourself." It was never the gear. He closed the notes and sat for a while in the quiet of the medical bay, thinking about a farmer's son for the cold north of a death world who had walked into a prison planet alone with a wrench and walked out with 12 people. The galaxy, Grell thought, was going to need some time to adjust its understanding.